there was a version of this person you were never actually dealing with. I want you to sit with that sentence before we go anywhere else, because I think it is the most clarifying thing this reading can offer you, and it deserves the full weight of your attention before I say anything else. The version of themselves they brought into your dynamic, the version you were trying to understand, trying to reach, trying to reconcile with what you also sensed underneath it, was a constructed thing, not a lie exactly, something more specific and more complicated than a lie. A carefully maintained presentation that had been operating for so long in their life that it had taken on the quality of felt reality even for the person wearing it, the specific way that a mask worn long enough begins to feel like a face. And now the mask has come off, not because they decided to remove it, not because you finally found the right words or the right moment or the right combination of patience and confrontation that unlocked something. It came off because it became impossible to sustain in the face of whatever has recently happened in this person's life, and because the thing underneath it, the actual person, the one without the ego protection and the pride armor and the specific defensive architecture they had constructed around themselves, has been looking at what the ego has cost them and has arrived at a conclusion that they cannot easily walk back from. The conclusion is you, specifically. What their ego cost them was you. And they know it now in the full, sober, no longer deniable way that tends to arrive when the performance of not caring has finally run out of momentum, and what remains is just the reality of caring, unadorned and impossible to rationalize away. Let me walk you through what the cards revealed about this in complete detail. Let me describe what I felt the moment this energy opened, because the initial impressions were immediate and they had a specific quality I want to share before we touch the cards. I felt the particular emotional texture of someone who has just stopped running, not the collapsed exhaustion of someone who has been forced to stop. The specific, somewhat disoriented quality of someone who simply ran out of reasons to keep going in the direction they were going, who turned around and found that the thing they had been running from was still exactly where they left it, unchanged and undeniable, waiting with a patience they had perhaps not anticipated it would have. I also felt something I can only describe as nakedness, not vulnerability in the comfortable, somewhat trendy sense of the word. The specific, slightly raw experience of someone who has had their protective layer removed, who is standing in their own life without the familiar structure of the ego's defenses, and who is discovering in real time that the interior experience of being unprotected is considerably more uncomfortable and considerably more honest than anything they were experiencing while the protection was in place. That nakedness is new for them, and it has produced a quality of seeing you clearly that was not previously available. The first card in this reading arrived in the position representing what this person's ego was actually doing, the specific function it was serving in how they were showing up in relation to you. And I want to describe it with precision because I think understanding the mechanism is as important as understanding the outcome. This card shows a figure seated on a throne of clouds, surrounded by 4 swords arranged in a formal pattern, a 5th held upright in a gesture of authority and judgment. This is the figure of someone who has organized themselves around being right, not in the petty, small sense of the word, but in the deep, structural sense of someone whose sense of their own worth has become entangled with their sense of their own correctness, who has built their identity partly around being the person who sees clearly and judges accurately and is not moved by things that move lesser people. What I am reading in this card about what this person's ego was doing in relation to you is something specific. The specific mechanism of their pride was this: to admit that they were fully affected by you, to admit the full depth of what they felt and what they wanted and what it cost them to not have it, would have required them to admit that they were as vulnerable and as moved and as humanly in need of connection as everyone else. And that admission was, for the construction of self they had built, genuinely threatening, not consciously threatening. The threat operated below the level of their full awareness, but it was real, and it was the engine of much of what frustrated you about how they showed up. I also want to speak to the air element of this card because it belongs to the suit of the mind and of thought, and what this person's ego was doing was primarily cognitive. It was constructing and maintaining a narrative about themselves and about this dynamic that protected them from the full experience of what was actually happening. The narrative required constant maintenance, constant interpretation of events in a particular direction, constant reframing of what they felt as something less than what it was. That is exhausting work, and it is the work that has now finally stopped. The second card arrived in the position representing what specifically happened that brought the mask down, the event or realization or accumulation of moments that produced the collapse of the ego's defensive architecture. And I want to describe this carefully because I think understanding it changes how you hold what follows. This card shows a figure lying still, the imagery of a genuine and comprehensive ending, the kind that removes any ambiguity about whether something is actually over. But what I want to focus on in this card, in this position, is not the devastation of it, but the specific clarity that this kind of ending produces. The way that when something is completely unambiguously finished, the mind stops trying to manage it and simply sees it for what it was. What I am sensing about what happened for this person is that something ended so completely and so finally that the ego's usual strategies for continuing to function became unavailable. The move of not fully caring, which had been protecting them from fully feeling, stopped being executable. The narrative that allowed them to keep the experience at a managed distance from themselves collapsed, because the distance itself collapsed. And what they were left with in the aftermath of whatever this was the full unmediated experience of what actually had been true about you and about what you meant to them and about what their pride cost them in real terms. I also want to speak to the numerology of this card because the number here represents the absolute completion of its suit, the fullest possible intensity of its element's energy concentrated into a single moment. In the suit governing the mind, this number represents the specific final moment of a mental cycle, the last point before something genuinely transforms into something else. What this person experienced was the last moment of the ego's particular story, the moment where it ran completely out of credibility, and what comes after it begins. Does this feel like it is mapping onto something you have been witnessing in this person lately, Virgo? The specific quality of someone who has stopped performing a particular version of themselves and who is now operating from somewhere more genuine and more uncomfortable? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear how this is landing against your actual experience of them. The third card arrived in the position I read as what this person is actually experiencing now that the mask is off, the interior reality of someone whose ego construction has recently failed. And I want to describe this with genuine care because I think it matters for how you receive whatever comes from this person next. This card shows a figure emerging from a still pool of water, holding a sword upright toward a clear sky. the quality of someone who has passed through something significant and who is standing in the specific, somewhat disoriented clarity that follows a major internal shift. The emergence from water speaks to the emotional processing that has been underway, the specific work of feeling something that was previously being managed rather than felt. And the sword raised toward clarity speaks to the mental clearing that follows genuine, thorough feeling, the way that actually experiencing something rather than managing it tends to produce a quality of seeing that managing never could. What I am sensing in this card about where this person currently is something I want to name honestly. They are not comfortable. The clarity they are now experiencing is real, and it is producing genuine recognition of things they had been successfully not seeing. But recognition is not the same as peace. They are sitting with what they understand now in a way that is considerably less comfortable than sitting with the managed distance of before. The ego was doing a specific job, and it did not do that job for no reason. It was protecting them from something genuinely uncomfortable, and now that protection is gone. The uncomfortable thing is fully present. The uncomfortable thing is the full knowledge of what they did and did not do in relation to you and what it cost. That is what they are now in the direct experience of. Inhale with me, Virgo. Because the fourth card carries the most direct message about what this person wants to do with where they now find themselves. This card shows a single new beginning, the first of its suit, a hand emerging from a cloud with something being offered, the specific quality of something pure and undiluted and without complication, arriving in a moment that is still open enough to receive it. The fire element of this suit speaks to initiative, to the willingness to begin something, to the specific quality of energy that does not wait for conditions to be perfect before moving. And the very first position in this suit represents potential in its most genuine form, before any of the complication that the subsequent positions describe has entered. What I am reading in this card is something I want to be specific about. This person wants to reach out, not in the tentative, protective, still performing way of someone who has not yet fully reckoned with what the ego has cost, from a place of actually having done some of that reckoning and of actually being willing to move forward from it into something that does not have the same protective architecture. The impulse to contact you is genuinely new in its quality, even if the person feeling it is familiar. I also want to speak to the fire element's connection to honesty, because this suit does not traffic in the kind of careful, managed communication that characterized the mask's version of this person. Fire speaks before it thinks. It does not calculate the optimal angle of approach. What this person is being moved toward is a more direct, more honest, more from the actual interior version of reaching toward you than anything the ego's carefully managed communication style would have permitted before. That directness may be a little unpolished. It may not arrive with perfect language or perfect timing, but it will be real in a way that their communication with you has sometimes not been, and that realness is more valuable than any polish the ego was previously applying. I want to address something important about how you receive what comes from this person, because I think Virgo's particular combination of memory and analytical precision and genuine awareness of patterns creates a specific challenge in exactly this kind of moment. You remember everything, not in a resentful way, in the specific, thorough Virgo way of having retained the full record of every interaction, every inconsistency, every moment where what was said did not quite match what was demonstrated, every place where the gap between the presentation and the reality was visible to you, even if never fully acknowledged. That record is real, and your retention of it is not a character flaw. It is part of how your mind works, and it has served you by preventing you from being naive, where naivety would have cost you. What I want to offer alongside that record is this: the person who created those memories and the person who is now standing without the mask are not entirely the same configuration. The behavior that produced what you remember was behavior that was coming from the specific place of someone managing their own vulnerability through pride, and the management has changed something about the situation, even if the person is still recognizably themselves. It does not erase the record. It does not require you to pretend it does not exist, but it does potentially change what the record means, and how you hold it going forward is genuinely your choice rather than something determined in advance by what came before. I am also sensing something about the specific pace at which this person is going to be able to demonstrate rather than simply express the change, and I want to be honest about it. Genuine change from the deep ego structure this card describes is not instantaneous. It is not a single conversation or a single gesture. It is visible over time through the accumulation of small, consistent behaviors that add up to something different from the pattern you have previously experienced. I want you to hold appropriate space for that time while also being clear with yourself and potentially with them about what you need to see in order to genuinely trust what is being claimed. Your patience is one of your virtues. Your discernment is another. Both are going to be needed here, and neither cancels the other out. The fifth card arrived in the position of what is genuinely possible now that this ego structure has shifted, what actually becomes available between you when the mask stays off. And I want to describe it with the warmth it carries because it has been waiting to be available for a long time. This card shows two figures in genuine, mutual, fully inhabited recognition of each other, cups extended between them at equal height, the quality of two people who are actually meeting rather than two presentations performing connection at each other. The winged figure hovering between them speaks to something larger than the personal moment being blessed by its own significance. And the specific position of this card in the suit that governs feeling and genuine emotional connection points towards something that has not previously been fully available because the ego was always in the way of it. What I am sensing this card is describing is the possibility of actual intimacy with this person, the specific rare quality of being genuinely known and genuinely seeing without the protective distancing that the ego required of every interaction. The person without the mask is still this person. They have not become someone else, but they have become a version of themselves who is less interested in being seen as a particular thing and more capable of simply being. And that shift in orientation changes what is possible between you considerably. The version of this connection that was always potentially available but that the ego kept out of reach is what this card is pointing toward. It is the version where neither of you is managing anything, where what you bring is what you bring and what they bring is what they bring, and the meeting point of those two genuine things has room to become what it actually wants to become. I also want to speak to the water element of this card and what it tells me about the quality of feeling now present in this dynamic. Water in the cups represents emotional reality in its most genuine form, and the cups held at equal height by two figures of equal standing describe something that had previously been architecturally impossible because the ego required a specific elevation, positioning that kept this person slightly above the full vulnerability of equal exchange. The evening of the cups, both raised to the same level, both held by people genuinely facing each other, is a picture of what becomes possible when that elevation finally actually falls. Something genuinely reciprocal. Something where both people are in the experience rather than one person managing the experience while the other tries to navigate the management. That version has not been available before. It is approaching now. Before I close this reading, I want to say something about how to hold your own position in this, because I think your position deserves as much attention as theirs. You have been patient with this person in ways that cost you something real. You have extended interpretations and benefits of the doubt and maintained a care for this connection that the other person from behind their mask was not always equipped to meet in kind. That patience is real and the cost of it is real, and neither of those things should be elided by the excitement of someone's ego finally stepping aside. What you are allowed to feel is what you actually feel, including the relief that this shift is real, including the frustration that it took this long, including whatever complicated mixture of wanting this and also being genuinely tired from wanting it for so long that finds its way into your experience of this moment. All of those things can be true simultaneously, and the appropriate response to this person's renewed realness is not to immediately perform the version of yourself that has already forgiven everything and is available to pick up where things left off. Your process matters. Your timeline matters. And anyone who has genuinely shed their ego enough to reach towards you honestly is also in that genuine place, capable of understanding that the person they are reaching toward has been doing their own work in the interval and is not simply waiting unchanged and immediately available. Come to this, if you come to it, as yourself, fully and without management. That is all this moment requires of either of you. If this reading named something you have been watching happen in someone's energy, the specific quality of someone whose pride has recently failed them and who is now operating from a more genuine place, please share it with a Virgo who might be navigating this exact territory and who needs to hear that the mask coming off is real and that what is underneath it is worth the consideration. And leave a comment. I want to hear how this is showing up in your actual life. I read every single comment and I hold what is shared in this space with genuine care long after this video ends. Until next time, Virgo, the mask came off. Not because you asked it to, because what was underneath it finally became too real to hide. What you do with that is yours to decide. But the person standing there now is considerably more worth knowing than the one who was wearing it.